of the World. The Great Ice Wall did not just mark the end of the map, it marked the end of mercy. Theron stood at its base, a speck of grit against 1,000 feet of translucent, jagged sapphire. He had spent his life chasing the horizon, but here, the horizon was a vertical cliff that bled cold. Above him, the sky was not blue, but a bruised, suffocating purple that seemed to press down on the very air he breathed. Behind him, Solveig knelt in the snow, her fingers trembling as she tuned the frequency on her brass surveyor's kit. The needles didn't spin, they shivered. She heard it first, not the wind, but a rhythmic, wet thumping coming from the other side. It sounded like a giant heart beating beneath a layer of glass. "Theron," she whispered, her breath a ghost in the air. "The wall isn't just ice. It's a scab, and something underneath is trying to pick it open." They began the ascent, driven by a desperate scholarly hunger to see what lay beyond the forbidden. Theron hammered his pitons into the frozen surface, each strike echoing like a gunshot. He reached down, his gloved hand catching Solveig's wrist as she slipped. The ice beneath them felt strangely warm to the touch, pulsing with a low, sickening heat that defied the sub-zero wind. When they finally hauled themselves over the summit, the world died. Beyond the wall lay no new continent, but a vast, undulating plain of obsidian-colored flesh and white bone. There were no trees, only tall, ossified pillars that looked like frozen screams. Solveig gasped, her eyes reflecting a landscape where gravity seemed a mere suggestion, and the stars were replaced by glowing, lidless orbs in the charcoal sky. Theron ignited a magnesium flare, the brilliant white light cutting through the oppressive gloom. He stepped forward onto the ground, which felt soft and yielding, like walking on a bruised lung. The light revealed things that should not be, shadows that moved independently of the objects casting them, and puddles of silver liquid that crawled away from the heat of the flame. "Did you hear that?" Solveig asked, frozen in place. From the forest of bone pillars came a sound, a perfect, crystalline imitation of her own mother's voice, calling her name from 1,000 miles away. She turned toward the dark, her lantern flickering. A shape shifted between the pillars, something tall and impossibly thin, its limbs folding in directions that defied geometry. Theron spun around, hearing his own voice coming from the opposite direction. "Solveig, get back!" the voice shouted. But Theron's mouth hadn't moved. He realized then that the creatures beyond the wall, the echo hunters, didn't have voices of their own. They stole the sounds of the living to lure them into the dark, weaving a web of familiar lies to mask their predatory hunger. One of the creatures stepped into the dim light of Solveig's lantern. It was a nightmare of pale, translucent skin stretched over a frame of jagged ice. It had no eyes, only a vertical slit that ran the length of its torso, filled with hundreds of tiny, vibrating human teeth. It moved with a sickening, twitching grace, its long fingers clicking like frozen branches. Theron lunged forward, swinging his heavy climbing axe at the beast. The blade connected with a sound like shattering glass, but no blood spilled. Instead, a cloud of freezing vapor erupted from the wound, turning Theron's sleeve to brittle ice instantly. The creature didn't flinch. It simply tilted its head, mimicking the sound of Theron's grunt of pain with mocking precision. Solveig scrambled backward, her hands brushing against one of the bone pillars. She realized with a jolt of horror that the pillars weren't stone or bone. They were people, explorers from centuries past, frozen mid-stride and coated in a layer of calcified sorrow. Their faces were locked in eternal silent screams, their bodies repurposed as the very architecture of this hellish realm. The creature standing before them began to change. Its pale skin rippled and hardened, turning into the same sapphire ice that formed the Great Wall. It wasn't just a resident of this place, it was the builder. The wall was not a natural barrier, but a cage built by these things, not to keep humanity out, but to store their harvest until the world on the other side was cold enough to consume. Theron grabbed Solveig, dragging her back toward the precipice. As they tumbled back over the edge of the ice wall and began their frantic slide down toward the world they knew, Theron looked back one last time. The wall wasn't a defense. It was a slowly advancing glacier, and behind it, 1,000 lidless eyes were watching, waiting for the final frost to turn the whole world into a graveyard of sapphire pillars.